Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to look at QNAP's QTS and QuTS NAS platform and compare it against UnRAID. And in this video, I'm hoping by the end of this, you will understand which one of these best suits your needs. But before we go any further, a few disclaimers straight off the bat. Number one, look at that down there that's saying activate Windows. That's because we're using a VM in order to access these that I've got running on another system. It allows me to record better, but I'm using a standard trial version of Windows, and consequently that warning is there. Don't worry, we're just going to leave it there on screen, but I just wanted to highlight that because it kicked in halfway through another video that I did recently with DSM, and I just wanted to highlight. Second thing I want to highlight straight away is this is not going to be an enormously powerful deep dive into both of these platforms. I've done that in other videos. In the case of both QTS and QuTS, I've done full hour-long videos going through all of their features, all of the pros, all of the cons, all the way through. And the same goes in the case of UnRAID. I've done several videos, ones where I've done the pros and cons of UnRAID, as well as discussing it with Ed over at Space Invader 1. We've discussed it a few times, and we've done some deep dives with the software utilising a brand new NAS that arrived recently in the form of the Link Station N1, a NAS that we are going to refer to later on that arrives with a UnRAID license included. That's what we're going to be utilising for today's UnRAID section of the video, when we're sort of going through all of the UI. And in the case of the QNAP, we're utilising one 872X NAS alongside the AI-powered TS642, the AI642. That's what. So there is our QUTS system, and there is our QTS system there, but more on that later on. But if you do want to learn more about these OSs, you can go into these videos linked in the description that will tell you way more about them. But let's crack on. The first section that we're going to be looking at here is, of course, the cost of both of these. This video has been broken down into 6 sections: cost, apps and tools, the graphical user interface, storage management, resources, and system management, with a conclusion at the end. So let's crack on with our first one, the cost. Between the two of them, it will come as absolutely zero surprise to many of you that UnRAID is definitely the more affordable of the two. What do I mean by that? Well, QTS and QUTS cannot be purchased on their own. They can only be purchased with a NAS. Now, that does mean that depending on the system you go for, the price of the software and indeed the inclusive hardware are going to differ. So, for example, if we look at the range of solutions available from QNAP, there's a lot. There is a lot of solutions. These will change in price from, £100, £150, all the way to £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, £10,000, £15,000, depending on that. And the level of hardware capabilities included with the software will differ accordingly. So, to nail the prices down as best we can, here's what we'll do. If you want the entrance point into QNAP software, QTS, the lowest price I could find right now for a new generation device was $129 to $139 in the US there, $174 there, but I found it for much lower on Amazon. I looked around and I could find it for as low as $129, even $119 in some places. Now, that is the ARM CPU version that loses a number of key features for things like virtualization and some of the higher end tools. So if you want access to the full complement of services from QTS, then you need to go for this NAS here. This is the TS264. There is a smaller NAS, the 262, that although that does support the majority of features, it arrives with less memory in some cases, and the CPU being dual core. I think you have to spend $350 to $400 to really get the full range of QNAP applications and services, and also because of that 8 gig of memory included as well. Again, there are ways to bring that number down to about $350, looking at some other options. And if you want to go for QUTS, the lowest price I could find to access QUTS, the ZFS version of QNAP software, was $750. So again, an enormous difference in price when we move over to UnRAID over here, where the entrance price point is $59 for up to 6 bays, $89 for up to 12 bays, and $129 for limitless bays. And you can upgrade between them for $39 from basic to plus and $49 from plus to pro if you want to scale up your system. But of course, that does not include the hardware. But the benefit, of UnRAID, of course, is you can use pretty much any hardware. You can go ahead if you choose to buy, second-hand PCs, reuse old PCs if you've got them knocking around. You can go ahead and, buy old server-grade stuff, old generation, and install UnRAID. And that's because UnRAID runs from a USB drive. You can go ahead, grab yourself a USB, and you can install UnRAID on pretty much anything. I say anything, there are some caveats. If you try to run it on an ARM-based system, it will not run at all, or not particularly well at all. You will need to go for an x86 processor system, but they've been around now for close to 2 decades, so they are available. In the case of both systems too, you can go ahead if you choose and gain access to a demo version of both QTS and QuTS if you want to test out the software first. And with UnRAID, you can go ahead and download a free trial if you wish for 30 days to use the software and find out if it's right for you. But ultimately, between the two of them, unsurprisingly, if the amount of money you're whacking down on the table is important enough to you, and that's pretty much your main defining factor, chances are UnRAID is going to be the better choice in terms of the actual money you're spending. But what about value? Well, if we're going to talk about value, we've got to talk about what's inclusive with the software, because when you pay that money, you want to know that what you're getting in return is, worth the money. So if you're going to spend more, you want more, right? Well, I'd say between the two of them, when it comes to apps, tools and services, if we focus on first party, QNAP wins by an absolute landslide. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, UnRAID, as you can see there from the user interface, something we'll talk about more later on, it may look a little bare bones. There's, some information there on screen, and you can pull up the help and guides, something we'll talk about later on to find out more about the system. But ultimately, the apps and services that are included, for the most part, are going to be third party. They're going to be developed by third party users. They're going to be developed by individuals, smaller groups, or converted from pre-existing client tools, be they, tools, utilities, or full apps and server grade stuff that already exists from third parties, Plex, Nextcloud, stuff like that, and then converted over to UnRAID ready installations. You're not running command line. You don't have to be overly reliant on the terminal at the start, at least. When installing them, they are click and install, but at the same time, these aren't first-party apps, hence why the price of UnRAID you are paying for the UnRAID base level software that's running, or it's booted from a USB and onto the system memory for operation. So sometimes some of these third-party applications that you do choose to install utilizing the App Center on UnRAID, some of them may need licenses such as Plex Media Server and Plex Pass. They may well require a license that is utilized with that individual software there. Equally, although the software has huge innovations such as, more recently, improvements in SSD caching, the utilization of Docker and virtual machine deployment being ever better, and support recently of ZFS for ZFS pools, it has to be said that, again, with UnRAID, what you're paying for is the baseline OS, and a lot of the apps and features need third-party tools to install, such as, for example, if you go into the App Center and install Nerd Tools gives you a huge range of additional apps and services that you can install and run from the system for point-to-point backups. If you want to run cloud synchronization, be it blob-based or simple online bucket-based, if you want to run your snapshots, if you want to run immutable backups, if you want to run cloning and synchronization and multi-tiered backups, NAS to NAS, NAS to clouds, NAS to USB, or install third-party applications and driver tools to take advantage of hardware services on your server of choice, all of those can be installed either using individual app packs or finding individual tools there on the repositories. However, all third party, which means you can open the door to more attack vectors when you're using third party tools where it's not UnRAID themselves that are managing it. They do say as much on their own security documentation when they do highlight that a lot of these apps are going to be third party based. Now, the QNAP platform does support third-party applications, arguably more than most other NAS brands out there, but they also provide a lot of first-party tools as well. All of these presented in quite a user-friendly fashion, much like, an Android tablet or an iPad, allowing you to install them all one click, just like they are on UnRAID, but access them in a far more user-friendly fashion there. But it doesn't stop there. Alongside that, you've got the support of the third-party tools that we mentioned earlier on, but on top of that, you can access, alongside the third-party tools, third-party app centers that allow you to install customized and pre-built app centers. While that loads there, I'm actually doing a big upload or a big download there for TrueNAS, so that is rinsing my internet connections. But as you can see, you can choose, if you wish, to install a third-party app center known as QNAP Club, available here, which has got loads of those community-built applications that you can run on the NAS, either outputting via HDMI or on the local area network, or with client apps. On the subject of client apps, there is absolutely loads. There are client applications to install on Windows, Mac and Linux systems that can be used for business, can be used for fun and more. And if you use the App Center, you've got applications for surveillance, you've got applications for backups, for synchronization, for virtual machine deployment. You can go ahead and within 2 to 3 clicks be running an Ubuntu VM if you choose, or use the virtual machine application, Virtualization Station, and then Virtualization Station will allow you to not only install and run VMs very, very easily, but it even allows you to 1 or 2 click install your virtual machines directly from repositories such as the VM Marketplace, and also from the overview, go ahead and just create VM. We've still got our internet connection being absolutely rinsed by TrueNAS there in the background, but allow you to download VMs from Windows 7, 8 and 10 and now 11 to be downloaded directly onto the system. That's what we're using today, hence why we've got our Windows license reminder. But you can download these within 3 clicks to run from the VM system. All of that from within the user interface of the QNAP. Then you've got surveillance apps, AI photo apps, again, no synchronization apps, but then silly ones such as karaoke apps, multimedia apps, and more. All of them built in. And that's what I mean about the value structure. They do throw in tools for you there. And then if you want to use the QNAP NAS accessible on your iPad or iPhone, there's loads of first-party apps that are tailored to allow you to access your NAS in the right way. The same goes for Android as well. Same goes if you want to use Fire TV. There are loads of ways to communicate with the NAS. So in terms of the QNAP NAS's value, in terms of apps, tools, features and services, there are just way many first-party ones that are rolled in and managed by the brand than compared with UnRAID, which provides you the platform for that money you're paying. But before we roll things over on this particular subject and move over to the graphical user interface section of the video, it is worth highlighting that that support is finite. Now, in the case of UnRAID, when you pay that $59, $89 or $129, that is a lifetime license. What that means is all the innovations, all of the upgrades, all of the updates and feature and security patches and everything that happens without the course of the system's software lifespan that you're running from that USB is included. So if you went ahead, for example, and bought a second-hand server, used this for the next decade, and then upgraded your hardware to a new system and carried over your existing UnRAID array and UI, that's included, and you'll continue to get all of the updates that are rolled out by UnRAID in their platform. And you don't even have a very high benchmark in terms of specifications in order to do so. Now, in the case of the QNAP has a product support lifespan. Now, what they state a lot of the time is end of life. Now, end of life isn't end of your life, that's the end of the hardware and software life. Products have a hardware life that's generally referred to as the warranty period, but in terms of software, as you can see here, we've got all of these systems here on the left-hand side of the screen listed with how long the OS maintenance and updates are listed for. We've got full, and then all of a sudden, we start seeing discontinued. Now, fair play, some of these systems are more than a decade old, 12, 13 years in some cases. But it's worth highlighting that these systems no longer receive firmware updates. They don't get the latest version of QTS, QTS 5, and they're limited to QTS 4.3, or in some cases 4.1, and even older 3.3 in some cases. And QNAP has ceased producing both security and feature updates for some of these firmwares. That means if you are an owner of a TS409, your system isn't getting security patches, it's not getting feature updates, and ultimately that system now has a very physical and realized glass ceiling. That money you paid for that system, you're not getting the updates. Now, QNAP is a business. They are obviously running a software that needs money coming in to further that development. But then you could argue UnRAID does the same thing. The difference is QNAP has to provide a larger amount of software support across all of the individual apps and the OS on those products and the lifespan that it's listing on its site. So unfortunately, although in some cases it's understandable that a brand much like Apple probably isn't rolling out the same level of updates for its first iPhone as it is for the recent one, in the same way, QNAP is not committed to updating all of those firmwares throughout the entire length and breadth of its history as a brand. And unfortunately, that means that in terms of the long game, the 10, the 15, the 20 years later, UnRAID will still be providing you updates for these licenses in a way that the QNAP platform won't. So do bear that in mind with all those apps, tools and services, whether they're first or third party on the platforms. Now, in terms of managing your servers, when it comes to utilizing the graphical user interface here, I will say that overall, if you are a relative novice, you are definitely going to prefer the QNAP side of things. It's a lot more user-friendly and graphical, but if you know what you're doing, if you've got even some relatively low-level experience of command line, if you would rather have a degree of control over your system and just know that your elements and your capabilities are genuinely limitless, then the UnRAID platform is probably going to suit you. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of this I've already covered, but notwithstanding all of those applications and services, on top of that, navigating the QNAP system, for someone that doesn't have a system admin in-house or someone that isn't as detailed tech versed in the world of servers, it's just more intuitive on the QNAP side. What do I mean by that? Well, looking at all these icons and looking at this screen between the two of them, between UnRAID and the QNAP, if I wanted to go and navigate, the settings of the system, I go to settings on the UnRAID and I go to the control panel here on the QNAP. Things are laid out there, and again, I know I've squished the screen slightly here because we're keeping them side by side. Normally you would see it much bigger like this, but unfortunately we can't do that for this video. But things are laid out in categories not dissimilar on both of them, and if we dig a little deeper we can make our way in. So for example, if we want to manage the date and time on both of these, we would go into both of them and their respective dates and times and notification and general settings all the way through, allowing us to navigate effectively between the two of them. But when we want to go to apps and services, when we want to, for example, install applications between the two of them, they both have an app center, which is, pretty similar between the two of them. But when I want to run one of these applications, that's when things get a little messier. Because in the QNAP, I just go to the start menu and there's all of my apps. Same goes on the ZFS platform. If I want to go ahead and navigate there, I go in, there's my apps and services. Whereas here they're listed in, and if I, for example, wanted to use all of those nerd tools, now I'm broken in here. And if I want to run, for example, this resource monitor tool here, I can't just click to run it. There is no option there along the right to run it. And I need often with many of these tools, some of them will appear in the main level of apps and tools, and therefore from there allow you to run them accordingly within here. But some of them will need you to run back into the command line. Whereas in the case of the QNAP, they've all been designed with their own graphical user interface. So if I want to run torrents or a download server, I run up the download system here, add downloads and tasks, there's all of my options. Well, if I want to, go in and manage some photos and video, well, maybe I'll go into Music Station, play some of my music. Maybe if I want to, look at some of the photos on my system, I can go ahead, go into the next panel there, go into QMAGI, opens up in a new tab. Here's my AI-powered photo recognition tool booting up for me here. Well, if I just want to browse files and folders, well, nice and simple, go to the file manager here. And again, you can download and install a lot of these things on UnRAID quite easily by heading over to, once again, that tool that we talked about earlier on for adding, bulk management of tools directly into the system via Nerd Tools and access files and folders and stuff like that. And they all get added accordingly there, which means from there, I can go ahead and go to folder view, but it doesn't feel as intuitive. It doesn't feel as smooth. And with the QNAP one, I've got copy, paste, archiving. I've got all of those options, as well as the ability, if I wish, to go ahead and, access a lot of my photos, video and music from within this file manager. And the same extends if I want to access the device, via HDMI. Here's an example of what the HDMI output looks like on the QNAP running a parallel user interface with a KVM keyboard video mouse, and I can go ahead and install many applications into that window. On top of that, if I want to run virtual machines, although virtual machines and Docker applications can be installed easily within UnRAID, it's not as straightforward or as user-friendly as it is on the QNAP using Container Manager or Virtualization Station. If I want to manage the system and its hardware portfolio, looking at resources, how much is being used by the system, how little things are being used, I just go into the QNAP and use the resource monitor, or I can use the resource button here to find out information on the fly. And although there is a dashboard on UnRAID to give me real-time information about the device, it doesn't really extend very far. And once again, there are, tools that you can get in the App Center to get a graphical user interface to manage your system tools. But because they're not included with UnRAID, it makes it very difficult to include them on UnRAID when we are talking about third-party tools that introduce attack vectors when you're using third-party tools, and you have to give certain powers and privileges to them. Now, let's face it, if we're going to talk about attack vectors, let's talk about the elephant in the room. QNAP was attacked by Deadbolt successfully, a ransomware group, along with brands like TerraMaster and AcerStore. They're not the first brands to be hit by ransomware. They won't be the last, and QNAP have been hit by several: QSnatch, QLocker, and of course, Deadbolt. And at least one of those instances was shown that, was it 100% confirmed? I think it was 99% confirmed that it was a weakness in an application that allowed a hard-coded credential. Now, again, that means that no one is perfect, of course, but that still doesn't remove the fact that using third-party, as well as first-party, of course, in that instance, but third-party tools does open the door to attack variables, and therefore having a greater degree of control over the applications inside the system will generally, in the grand scheme of things, always be considered the best option. It's not perfect, nothing is, and I think QNAP are still nursing a lot of bruises from Deadbolt, but at least when it comes to management and the GUI between these two, thanks to QNAP having that user-friendly interface and having all of those different apps, I think it overall means that the GUI on QNAP is going to be more accessible than it is on UnRAID. But UnRAID presents a greater degree of customization and control thanks to its leveraging both command level access and GUI level access in the web browser, which makes it very appealing to the more experienced storage user. Just bear in mind that they don't have the same level of client tools accessible, and although they present a lot of stuff on the GUI here, you only end up going maybe 2 or 3 levels before you inevitably have to resort back to SSH and command line in the terminal. That isn't to say that UnRAID doesn't give you a helping hand, of course. If you wish, you can go in and use the Help Manager here on the top left, and that allows you, for example, looking at the storage area here, if you need further assistance, click the Help tool here and boom, it will explain everything to you and give you a good helping hand. And as mentioned in previous videos, arguably the UnRAID community is one of the biggest out there in terms of assistance and support on this. It's not open source, but it's somewhere between open source and premium paid software. There's a lot of support and help for you to help you get along with this system if you are a relatively inexperienced user. But it still doesn't quite reach the same level of access and ease of use as you find on the QNAP. But just bear in mind that QTS and QuTS does that and oversimplifies things for users, which can sometimes lead to vulnerabilities because it's trying to make itself as easy as possible level, and therefore a lot of the choices that have to be made on a security and access level end up being default in some cases. Now, storage management between these two platforms is another area of quite a large amount of distinction between them. As mentioned in the introduction, UnRAID can pretty much run on anything as long as it's got an x86 processor, and for the sake of this review, we are utilising the new Link Plus Link Station N1 SSD NAS that's going to be on Indiegogo soon, and I wanted to use this to make it comparable because it would have been very easy to just install UnRAID on some insane 12th gen i9 system, but I think then it wouldn't have been relative to everyone. And this middle ground helps us in order to demonstrate a lot of the strengths and in some cases weaknesses of UnRAID, and we're going to highlight some of QNAP's ones as well, don't worry. But between the two of them, it comes down to two factors: one, performance; two, access and control. So in the case of UnRAID, it should be stated that for a long time, UnRAID, one of its regularly stated downfalls, at least until about 12 to 18 months ago, was that UnRAID's array, although remarkably safe and secure compared to a lot of other RAID configurations out there because of the way the disks span up and span down, and you could reuse the disk and arrays in other systems, it didn't grant a lot of performance. Now, I've linked to a video by a friend of the channel, Ed, over at Space Invader 1, who explains the parity of UnRAID significantly better than pretty much anyone out there. I thought about making a video before, but frankly his video is just too good and I'm not going to try and beat it. Long story short, parity on UnRAID disks is nice and straightforward insofar as it then spreads data with a parity disk, calculating all the data that's going across all the disks in forms of zeros and ones for if there is data present and if there is not. It calculates it right the way down to a nice hot cold system. That's a tremendous oversimplification, but long story short, it means that the arrays in an UnRAID array can be absolutely gargantuan. It also means support of BTRFS and mixed drive configurations are there. You just always have to make sure that the parity disk is bigger than any other drive there, or at least equal to the biggest drive that is there. Now, because of that, you don't have the multiple disks being read and written to as you find in traditional RAID arrays, and particularly in this case in the form of what you find in the QNAP NAS, where it is multiple drives being read and written to at any given time. Now, they have countered that in more recent revisions of UnRAID, introducing write caching. We can use an SSD where uploads go directly onto the SSD and then later during idle periods move over to the standard array of disks. But they still don't give the same level of performance benefit that you find with multiple disk drives in a single array being read and written to at the same time. And also QNAP's QTS system takes advantage of standard RAID configurations such as RAID 1, RAID 0, RAID 5, RAID 6, RAID 10, but it doesn't have the ability to mix and match drives in QTS. Although there is support of ext4, there is no support of BTRFS or ButterFS. Now, things change slightly when you move over to the QuTS system, because that is when ZFS is introduced. But then again, on UnRAID, ZFS is also introduced. In UnRAID version 6.12, I believe, it introduced ZFS pools. Now, this is where the whole performance array downfall of UnRAID got completely removed, allowing you to take advantage of the multi-disk read-write performance benefits of ZFS, as well as the benefits of things like triple parity, and the also integration of UnRAID's own system of storage management and read-write, meaning that you can take advantage of the performance benefits of ZFS while still enjoying the layout and arrangement of data on UnRAID. It does remove some of the benefits of ZFS that you might find in something like TrueNAS, such as inline data deduplication, inline data compression, compaction, all of those extra options, even resilvering that are included in TrueNAS and its application of ZFS are absent on UnRAID's application of that. Now, what that means is that although it's got the ZFS benefits of performance, it lacks some of the ZFS kind of overarching benefits, something that QNAP does include in its integration of ZFS. So all of the things I mentioned just now, so if we go into the storage pool benefits there, we can make our way in and we can see inline compression and duplication are enabled. On top of that, if we make our way into different storage areas, go into more details, we can find out the actual extent to which data has been saved. So you can find out that data reduction and how much is being worked out over time, as well as both of them benefiting from things like the triple parity RAID. And the QNAP there, arguably, although it's still not utilizing true ZFS in the same way that TrueNAS does, it arguably is handling more of its features and facilities on of ZFS on QuTS than it is on UnRAID overall. Also on top of that, although both of these support expansions, ZFS expansions are supported fully on QuTS now. So you don't have to use the arguably less efficient cluster expansion RAID. And I know TrueNAS is slowly but surely rolling out true expandability rather than kind of banging on additional RAIDs into a single cluster, an overarching multi-clustered storage pool that's visible to the end user, and going to a more regular add drives one by one. But QNAP have already rolled that into their ZFS expansions, and we've already done a video on that. Also, between the two of them, I think the user interface between the two of them, again, although you can improve it with the question mark there to find out more information about your drives and give you help with navigating between, it isn't that long before you are inevitably going to have to switch over to the command line to manage the storage in your UnRAID system using the terminal, whereas the QNAP, although you have the option of using SSH if you choose within the panel, again telnet SSH but using terminal mode, but you can pretty much dig in pretty deep into the individual drives in your QNAP NAS system very, very quickly. And on top of that, find out more about the health of the drives. You can use drive failure prediction. If a drive is starting to show signs of failure, you can have the system automatically clone a drive that's showing ill health signs onto a newly connected drive, and therefore slowly on a reboot take the drive that's showing signs of ill health over with a new drive. What does that mean? That means rather than a system going into a degraded state in the case of a drive failing when you do a RAID rebuild, in this case the drive already anticipates health issues with failure prediction, and then from there it will then swap the drive over with the healthy drive with exactly the same data that's been migrated over. It's that straightforward and saves you hours upon hours of, if not downtime, then reduced performance time in a RAID rebuild by comparison. Overall, between the two of them, although both of them support things like iSCSI London targets, snapshots, snapshot offsite replication, it's arguable that you still will need to use a lot of the extra services built in by third-party tools build out, whether they are in larger packs of tools like Nerd Tools, or if they're going to be some of the inclusive ones, of which there are not that many of which you have to use those third-party tools to access. They are native to the QNAP platform and first party there, as well as bolting on cloud storage or utilizing mounted storage to make that cloud storage, be it your bucket AWS, or you're utilizing, your Google Drive or Dropbox and making them appear local. You can even do it in reverse with virtual JBOD that allows you to take storage on one QNAP NAS and make it appear localized on another QNAP NAS. It's that straightforward. Overall, storage management between the two of them, once again, time and time and again, will come across a lot more straightforward and user-friendly here on the QNAP side, with things like the file station management there, the iSCSI manager and fiber channel manager there, allowing you to bolt on that remote level storage very, very easily in that block form rather than the file folder view. But you can also bolt that storage on remotely and then see it in a native file folder format there. Then you've got things like QFiling and QSearch that allow you to archive your data effectively or search the whole system data in a very straightforward and user-friendly way. There's even AI-powered support where you can use NASes such as the AI642 here, which has a dual CPU architecture with an MPU built into it, or you can go ahead and choose to use things like the Google TPU card in some systems with M2s available, which then allow you to do an even better job of harnessing AI in your system in an efficient and effective way. And with the rollout of integrated AI services coming to NAS soon on all of the NAS brands, I wouldn't be surprised if this further improves things when utilizing M2 TPU cards like the Google Coral and newer generation ones, and harnessing AI in your system in an intelligent fashion. Again, All of these things are available on the UnRAID side, but you need to rely on third-party tools to take advantage of most of them. Overall, it's still a case of user-friendly versus slightly more complex, but UnRAID is still significantly more user-friendly than TrueNAS, so we've got to give them credit for that. Now, when it comes to resource utilization, this is going to be a relatively short segment because, frankly, UnRAID is insane in how power efficient it is. Notwithstanding that it runs from a USB drive officially. Now, by running, of course, I mean that the bootloader is on the USB, but the system runs in the RAM. It has to be said that in terms of hardware utilization, you can run UnRAID on these insanely affordable systems. You can reuse old hardware, buy second-hand ex-server grade stuff, and you run UnRAID incredibly efficiently. Indeed, one of the reasons we're utilizing the LinkStation N1 is simply that it runs on a Celeron, but it's got 4 NVMe slots and a couple of SATA slots inside, and it only has the PSU is tiny, a 60-watt PSU external, and it's barely scratching the surface of that in terms of consumption. Now, in the case of the QNAP, as mentioned earlier on, you can buy QNAPs of varying degrees of hardware, but I would say that in terms of power consumption, the QNAP is less efficient overall. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, obviously, I'm running a lot more apps and services on both the QTS and QuTS NAS, but I'm still finding, on average, even when idle, when I booted the QNAP device up with none of these apps running, the QNAPs were using more system resources. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. The UnRAID, for example, the way the architecture and the way the UnRAID software runs, it's going to be, running it kind of on a different level in terms of consumption. Also, on top of that, with the array, unless you're actually physically using drives, some drives will power down to 0 or be completely unmounted at the boot if you set the system up that way. Ultimately, it means that UnRAID only uses hardware resources and power when it needs to, and therefore utilization will be painfully low unless you're actually doing active processes. Now, in the case of the QNAP, the QNAP is always seemingly hoarding a little bit more memory than it needs to in order to, flesh out and make sure things can run as well as they can. But on top of that, if you are running certain QNAP systems, again, like the TS133, again, running on an ARM-based processor, as mentioned earlier on, it's worth highlighting, QTS does not run hugely smoothly on this system if you run a handful of applications. It can run 2 to 3 individual applications at any given time very well. But the minute you go beyond that, the system doesn't deal with multi-user input-output as well on these more affordable systems, and you will just find that the software experience hangs a little bit more. Now, this is also exacerbated by the fact that in the App Center, I can click wildly, I can do whatever I want, and the system will generally look like it's following all of my commands. But occasionally, like you may have noticed earlier on when I opened QMaggie, it stalled for a little bit of time when I opened it. The reason being is it's letting me do lots of stuff here on the surface level, install apps, open Windows and do all that stuff, but the instructions being handed to the system can often be a little bit too much unless I'm using a particularly complex or powerful NAS. So for example, if I wanted to go ahead and install a bunch of these apps, it would let me click install on all of them, but in the back end the system might be freaking out. Now again, more powerful NAS systems and ones that use QuTS don't suffer this problem. They have much more advanced hardware and therefore the resources to let me do all of those things that I want to do. But I wish the QTS platform on these more affordable ARM-based NASs would hold back just a little bit and say, whoa there tech, stop installing stuff, for we're busy doing other things at the moment, please wait a moment. So overall, in terms of power efficiency, you can run the QNAP NAS and its software, the QTS platform, on way lower grade hardware, given that UnRAID can't run effectively on an ARM-based processor. And I've seen QTS run on ARM processors with half a gig of memory, when UnRAID has a recommended minimum spec of, I believe, 1 core, 1 gigahertz and 4 gig of memory. I've seen QTS run on 800 megahertz CPUs and half a gig of memory, but I'm not going to say it runs with all the bells and whistles, whereas UnRAID will give you the same base level experience on lower grade hardware as it will on high-end hardware. But just bear in mind some features such as some of the ZFS stuff and utilizing some of the VM and Docker applications there will be a lot more limited by comparison. And there you go. In summary, I think it's pretty clear how I'm going to conclude this video in saying that the QTS and QuTS platforms are much easier to use, and if you're a novice or someone that is IT knowledgeable but not network or data storage knowledgeable, you're probably going to find it a much smoother experience on the QNAP. Also, it has a large degree of first-party applications and services included, as well as a lot more ways in which you can interact with the system, either via HDMI in the web browser, iOS, Android, desktop tools, multimedia tools, third-party and first-party customized tools. All of them will allow you to access the system a great deal more smoothly and natively to your own personal setup without relying on third-party tools. Frog in my throat. It's also simpler to use rather than needing a system admin there in the background to get everything done. And when it comes to software support, although it is limited, it's still arguable that you're still going to get a good 10 years of software commitment from the brand on your software, very, very minimum. Is it perfect? By no means. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier on, with attacks of ransomware, they are a big target for a lot of users, and because of its having to spread itself so thin across all those different apps and services, we have seen instances of QNAP be successfully targeted by ransomware groups. And although they have made innovations and upgrades on their platform over time, vast numbers of them I might add, they're still always going to be a bigger target, and they're still going to need to win a lot of the public over in terms of security, even though they have implemented a lot of things and you have to stay on top of your updates. All of these bigger range of applications and inputs and outputs and ways to interact with the system are always going to lead to more time being spent on security advisories and staying on top of that. Now, in the case of UnRAID, it has to be said, it is by far the more affordable option of the two. Not just the software, which remember is a lifetime license with lifetime upgrades and firmware fixes, but also the hardware, be it reusing old hardware or buying second hand, is going to be way more affordable with UnRAID. Also, although it's not as user-friendly as TrueNAS, as user-friendly as QNAP's QTS or QuTS, it's still a lot more user-friendly than TrueNAS. Installing an application on TrueNAS is by no means an easy feat, and you still have to go via the jail creation methodology, and creating and installing apps is by no means one click. Things have improved a lot in TrueNAS Scale, of course, but in the case of TrueNAS Core, it is still by no means user-friendly, and UnRAID has capitalised substantially on being a great deal more user-friendly in those instances. Also, it is virtually limitless in terms of the configuration and control when it comes to those applications and services which, although are all third-party, I would still venture that those third-party applications still have a greater degree of customization and controlling what you can do with them. And with well over 1,000, I think 1,700 applications available to be installed by UnRAID, there's a lot you can do, but they are still third-party apps. And on top of that, when it comes to the configuration of those applications, it is left open-ended for you. And there are apps and services here that you are never going to find on paid platforms, simply because there isn't a big enough market for them. But there is still, an enthusiastic group of users that are going to want gaming servers, that are going to want customized repo servers, and DIY mods and tools of existing drivers that they want to port over to their UnRAID system. You're going to get that thanks to that larger UnRAID community. And although they don't have the same level of deployment as QTS or QuTS, it's still pretty darn big, and they still have management teams on top of their platform all the time, along with support networks in both the form of the community and even paid support with some of the professionals you can access and seek support with over on UnRAID's own site. They have a list of technical experts that can assist you all the time via paid support there, all of which accessible from their own website and in some cases from directly within UnRAID, with a bank of team members able to help you. So although it isn't as user-friendly as QTS or QuTS, it is still arguable, accessible, and If you're not a system admin but you're an enthusiast, I think you'll get by. And obviously a system admin have got more than enough here in terms of tools and UnRAID to get the job done. But this has been QTS and QuTS versus UnRAID. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you want to learn more, of course, there's the videos that I discussed earlier on where we're going through these individual platforms. And of course, you can go head over to NAScompares and use our free advice section on the right hand side of the page. Alternatively, if you need more assistance than that, you can go ahead over to our Ko-Fi or Patreon, where you can get further support from us. On top of that, we've got our membership tiers where you can get early access to videos in the inner circle, or you can use some of Ed's tools here on the right hand side of the screen to get the right NAS solution for your needs. Whether it is that you want to build a NAS from the ground up for the services and applications and hardware that you need, or alternatively, you can head over to tools such as the price per terabyte tool to get the very best hard drives at the very best price for your NAS. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.